What is the worst thing your government has done that most people don't know about? A charity built a children's hospital in my third world home country. The moment they left, the government sold the incubators, beds, air conditioning and anything else that can be removed. Distributed the money amongst themselves. Denmark. In 1951 the state forcibly removed 22 Greenlandic children from their parents and moved them to Denmark in order to give them a better life, so there could be role models for other Greenlanders, as a social experiment, which for obvious reasons was deeply traumatizing for the children. Only 22. Those are rookie numbers compared to big friendly Canada. The Canadian government and Catholic Church are responsible for thousands of native children being beaten, raped and buried in mass graves at our residential schools. Recently it's been very big news here because we are finding even more mass graves, think 700 bodies per location. Multiple new locations being found in the last month or so. We've known how bad residential schools were, but the sheer scope of the problem is now general public knowledge. A couple churches have been vandalized and arsoned. Since these new findings and all white people can do is get mad that our prime minister isn't coming out and calling church burning in response to a genocide or hate crime, which I don't think it is. Arson is bad, but burning a church because they destroyed your culture and killed your children is different than burning a church because you don't like Jesus. Not sure how well this is known, but there was an uprising in Namibia in the 18th century while it was still a German colony. The German soldiers refused to fight because they didn't want to shoot civilians. So the high command told them to shoot over their heads to push them out into the desert where they would starve them out. In the end, I believe 200k died. Netherlands massacring close to the entire population of an island group in Indonesia because we wanted all the nutmeg for ourselves. It happened in the 17th century on the Banda Islands. You can also count the independence war among the shit we pulled in Indonesia. South Celebes is maybe the most well known, but tens of thousands of civilians were killed by Dutch soldiers between 1945 and 1949. This is a black page in Dutch history that gets way too little attention. Every history book goes into detail how bad things were for Dutch people in 1940, 1945, especially the Dutch people captured by the Japanese in Indonesia. But then, nothing is said about how we did the exact same thing the moment the war was over. Everything my country has done has been so blatant and in your face. I'm sure the hidden things are even more shocking. Let's just say we didn't know about 3,000 tons of ammonium nitrate being stored in the port for 6 ducking years. What's been going before and since is even worse in my opinion. The explosion was merely icing on the cake. To give you some examples, 1 hoarding the free aid that came in after the blast so they can be resold, only to have 100s on tons of it spoil. 2 stealing international aid and selling it abroad. 3 employing tens of thousands at defunct institutions like the Department of Railway Services. We don't have a railway, and the Department of Nuclear Energy. We don't have nuclear energy. 4 refusing to take action to force banks to restore people's deposits. I suspect they've already stolen those deposits and are using them to pay their salaries and support prices of flour and fuel that they later steal. 5 refusing to take action to provide fuel and in many instances stealing fuel. 6 rejecting multi-billion-dollar necessary infrastructure projects that don't line their pockets. The list goes on and on and on. Out of interest, how has support for Hezbollah in Lebanon changed since everything blatantly went up shit creek? Sadly, it hasn't changed much. They barely lost a minuscule number of supporters despite everything. However, it's hard to blame many of their supporters because they rely on Hezbollah for their livelihoods. Hezbollah has a lot of people on their payroll, so we can't expect them to shun the entity that pays their bills without giving them some other form of income. And it's almost impossible to get them another source of income because of Hezbollah's stranglehold on the area and the current economic situation. It's a vicious cycle. Current war on drugs here in the Philippines. President Duterte allowed the police to kill suspected drug dealers. That's right. Kill. Not arrest. No investigation. No warrant. No court. A cop can waltz inside a house of a guy he doesn't like, kill him, plant some drugs and a gun, and go off scot-free. This has cost the lives of 5,000 drug dealers with no progress on the drug war. Sweden had concentration camps during World War II where they conducted racial studies. Australia had concentration camps during both World War I and World War II. Rottnest, the island most known for the cute quokkas, has had most its time as an Aboriginal prison island since Westerns arrived, but during World War II it was a camp for Italians, to be held in as they weren't trusted. Operation Searchlight. Basically, Bangladesh and Pakistan were once the same country. Don't ask me how that works. The bloody logistics don't make sense. Right. So there was a pretty terrible typhoon in Bangladesh that required urgent medical and financial assistance. Bangladesh, known as East Pakistan at the time, accepted aid from India while Pakistan, who really hates India, were slow to respond. Honestly, there's lots of reasons as to why Bangladesh split from Pakistan after the 1971 war. One big one being right after the typhoon, Pakistan decided to hold elections. Bangladesh got rightfully pissed off and put all of their votes into one party. Since Bangladesh had a much bigger population at the time, that party won handily. It looked like Bangladesh would finally get some aid. The military responded by commencing Operation Searchlight. They imprisoned intellectuals, slaughtered thousands of Bangladeshi officers, students and basically anyone with a way of assisting the Bangladesh party. They also obliterated any institution that could support refugees and raped thousands more. India got a little fed up with Pakistani soldiers constantly going over their airspace to do this, so they joined in the fighting. Alongside Bangladesh, India brutally beat the shit out of Pakistan, like giving a bully of his own medicine. India also had backup in the form of the US. And our allies were disgusted by our actions. Plus America wanted India as an ally instead of Palestine. Eventually we surrendered, but we totally screwed Bangladesh for generations to come. Can you believe it was once the backbone of our economy? Nowadays, no one's sorry cause the military made sure to only have the briefest of mentions of it in our history books. Like you have reasons for the war, but no details of any particular massacres. Plus our intentional aid of the Taliban in the 90s tends to totally overshadow this event. Magdalene laundries here in Ireland. They existed across the UK too, and I don't know about the rest of the world. They are infamous in the countries they existed. Anyway, these would have been religious institutions where pregnant unmarried women among other female sinners would go and forcefully spend a significant chunk of their life. The pregnant woman would obviously go into labor in these institutions, and without knowing what would happen, the nuns would take their babies minutes after birth and either kill them or send them out for adoption with no way of the mother finding them. There have been a good few instances where the grown-up baby tracked down their mother. This continued into the 70s or 80s, I believe, and families of the women were the ones that brought them there because of shame and all that. The massacre of Aboriginal people, also referred to as the Killing Times. Not sure how unknown this was, but it was never mentioned in school, so I'll put it here. I grew up in Tasmania, and not once growing up was it ever mentioned that one of the most successful genocides in history was committed here. Since learning about it a few years ago, any Tasmanians I've asked about it had no idea what I was talking about. Crazy how this stuff just gets buried. Indian residential schools. In Canada, starting in the mid-1800s, it became law that all indigenous children had to attend boarding schools funded by the government. If the families refused, the children were forcibly removed by a special police force. The children were stripped of their culture and forbidden to speak their indigenous language to better assimilate them to the Euro-majority population. Many of the schools were in remote locations to try to prevent families from intervening in the indoctrination of their children by the Catholic and Protestant churches at Canada's behest. The schools were overcrowded, underfunded, and had a mortality rate of 40-60%. Sexual and physical abuse was rampant. A good chunk of Canadians were unaware to various extents of schools, but over 150,000 children attended the schools over more than 100 years. The last one closed in 1996. So this history and trauma are much more recent than people are aware of. There's been shockwaves the past month up here, as searches on just a handful of properties that house the schools found almost 2,000 unmarked graves. A British lawyer, during his lunch break, was tasked with drawing the new borderline for Pakistan and India. He drew it with absolutely no knowledge or care or understanding of religious implications, and uprooted over 10 million people of varying religions, and forced them to move, causing tensions that escalated into violence. Radcliffe, the lawyer, and his team had no experience in borders, no advisors on how to draw a border, deliberately didn't get the UN experts involved as it would save time and save face and not give the impression that the British were losing control of their empire. Now we have, still to this day, a war between Pakistan and India. Radcliffe burnt all his papers before leaving and admitted that his lack of adaptation for the Indian climate affected his decision-making time as he just wanted to leave. So basically, he drew a border through a swathe of religions, understanding and not caring about the religious implications, and uprooting people's lives. Because duck this place. It's too hot. I'm going home. Yeah. That'll do. Let's go. Taiwan is not always as democratic and liberal as its reputation now. Before the democratization, dissidents, scholars, political activists, innocent people mistaken as communist spy got tortured and murdered all the time just like contemporary authoritarian regimes. The US committed an ethnic cleansing of Mexicans during the 1930s. 1.5 million people of Mexican descent, 3 of whom were born American citizens, were rounded up and loaded onto cattle cars, shipped back to Mexico, where nearly all hadn't lived for decades or had never lived at all. In the process of moving around that many people in harsh conditions, it is inevitable that people will die, and over 10,000 did. It's incredible to me that this isn't more widely known or usually even referred to as what it is, the textbook definition of ethnic cleansing. Most Canadians know, but foreigners might not. Residential schools. We kept the First Nations, Metit and Inuit there, and they were basically our education camps, where they were punished for not acting like the white man and wanting to keep their culture. I think this is being talked about a little more right now as they continue to find borders at former residential schools. I know they are changing the citizenship study guide to include more about it, as the current one only has like 3 sentences. It's awful that it took finding hundreds of unmarked graves for people to notice, but it's in the news now more than I've seen since I moved here. Maybe I'm naive, but I hope something productive can be done with the publicity. If most people means less than 50%, while the US would, overall, accept some 132,000 European Jews from 1933-1945, they also turned many away, including effectively halting emigration of European Jews between 1940-41. Roughly 60% of Americans surveyed between 1938-1940 in 5 different polls found Jews to have objectionable qualities. State Dept officials tried to block a report about the existence of the Holocaust in August 1942, only passing the information along after a 3-month investigation. The State Dept also delayed issuing funds to the World Jewish Congress. Roosevelt never issued an appeal to the German people regarding the treatment of its Jewish citizens, despite his promise to do so, even after knowledge of the Holocaust was in the press. Too many to think of, but the one I feel really bad for is my government not recognizing a group of indigenous people. They are the last one I think to remain in the jungle. Due to the profitability of selling wood deforestation, the government do not care about them. Large corporations would kick back to the government to attain logging license and clear out the jungle. If I remember correctly, the rainforest size decreased by over 50%. The indigenous people are nomads that move around the rainforest, is basically their homes. Due to deforestation, some of them couldn't stay in the forest anymore, so they moved out from there. Some managed to do well in cities, while some suffer from poverty. In all honesty, I've never met any of them. I could be wrong, but I think not many of them are around cities. The government basically treats them like nothing. A Swiss activist, Bruno Mansa, came and tried to help them. He disappeared in 2000. There are tons of theories around his disappearance, from being lost in the jungle. I highly doubt this one, cause he wasn't alone and wouldn't have happened to being assassinated. In my country there is only one reason to participate in politics: become rich. Every one of them are millionaires. Not only are they millionaires, but all their children or close family members are as well. They are either shareholders or part of the board of directors of the largest corporations in the country. If there is a World Best Parent in the World Award, all the politicians in my country would win it every single year, cause they are able to run a country and make their children ducking successful. Not just have a middle income happy children, but multi-million to billionaire children. I don't actually know if people outside know this or not, but Brazil had a military dictatorship from 1964 to 1984. If you in any way tried to go against it, the government would watch your every move, and if you were lucky, they would kill you in an accident. If you were not, you would be arrested and tortured. The shit I heard they would do is too horrible to write here. There are people today who defend this shit and say that it should happen again. Like our ducking president, who is a racist, sexist cunt that said that COVID was just a little cold and actually celebrated the anniversary of the dictatorship with a march with no masks. My country is a joke, and that isn't even considering that they tortured kids in front of their parents for confessions they didn't really have. The youngest person tortured in this dictatorship was 1 year and 8 months old at the time. He died at age 37. And indeed, Bolsonaro is a stupid excuse for a human being, if he can even be called that at this point. And quite honestly, most of his supporters doesn't fall far from the tree. Damn. If we were to list all the shit he said and tried to do, I honestly think there'd be like 5 millib worth of text. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing for more videos.